He was just trying to finish his shift. One last delivery, one wrong door, and a woman in a silk robe who whispered something that changed everything. What started as a mistake turned into a night no one expected. But not for the reasons you think. Before we begin, if stories about quiet strength, unexpected kindness, and second chances touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe. We've got more stories that just might stay with you long after the last word. Now let me take you back to the night it all began. Single dad delivered groceries to the wrong door. The woman in a silk robe said, "Stay for tonight." The rain had a rhythm that night, a sharp, unrelenting beat on the windshield matching the pounding in Daniel's temples. He gripped the steering wheel, squinting through the downpour at the GPS, blinking delivery 6 of 6. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from home. Maya's temps down a little. "Don't worry, she's sleeping now." Linda. Linda was the neighbor who watched Maya when Daniel took late shifts. He trusted her more than anyone else left in his life. Still, it was 10:54 p.m., and this was the third night in a row he'd been out past her bedtime. The building rose above him like a silver monument, lights glowing through sheets of rain. Langston Residences. A luxury tower? Daniel shook his head and grabbed the insulated bag from the seat. Groceries, gluten-free bread, almond milk, chamomile tea. Who orders tea this late? Inside, the concierge barely glanced at him as Daniel showed his delivery ID. Apartment 1603, he muttered to himself, stepping into the empty elevator. He jabbed the button for the 16th floor, but the elevator lights flickered and stuttered, then stopped at 19. The doors slid open. He hesitated. The hallway was lined with framed minimalist artwork, silent as a chapel. He double-checked the screen. It still said 1603, but maybe this was one of those buildings where floor numbers didn't match unit numbers. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's just get this done." He stepped up to 1906, the number gleaming beside a sleek black door, and knocked. A soft shuffle inside, a click, and then the door opened. She stood there barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe the color of ash, rose her hair falling loose around her shoulders, damp from either a bath or tears, he couldn't tell which. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup smudged. A shattered wine glass lay just beyond her feet on the floor. The sharp scent of Pinot Noir hung in the air, and yet what hit him wasn't the glamour or the mess. It was the loneliness. Thick, choking, tangible. Her voice, hoarse and barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "Stay. Just for tonight." Daniel blinked. He started lifting the bag. "I think I have the wrong apartment." She stared at him like she hadn't heard. Or maybe she had, she just didn't care. Then her eyes dropped to the bag in his hands. "You're not the concierge," she said flatly. "No, ma'am. I'm just delivering groceries." He offered a tentative smile. "Sorry to disturb you." She looked down at the broken glass behind her, and for a moment something shifted in her expression. Not embarrassment, not anger, just weariness. She stepped aside wordlessly and bent to begin picking up the shards with her bare hands. Wait, don't," Daniel said, stepping in before he realized what he was doing. "You'll cut yourself." She blinked at him but didn't stop. Daniel set the bag on the marble counter and reached into a sleek drawer, pulling out a towel. He knelt beside her, carefully collecting the pieces, mindful of her hands. She froze for a second, like she wasn't used to someone helping, then quietly let go. When the last shard was in the towel, he stood and looked at her. "Do you have a broom?" She gestured vaguely toward a hallway. He moved on instinct, found the closet, swept the glass. Even wiped the wine from the floor with the precision of someone who cleaned up too many messes that weren't his. When he came back, she was standing still, arms crossed over her chest, watching him like he was an alien. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. "I know," he replied simply. Silence. Then a chuckle, dry, brittle. "I forgot people like you exist." Daniel tilted his head. Like me. Strangers who help without asking why. He didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't say anything. I ordered those groceries, she said finally. For myself. Thought I'd feel human again if I ate something that wasn't reheated regret. Guess I missed the floor on that, too. Daniel smiled faintly. I think I missed it first. Another silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. You want some tea? She asked. It's the least I can offer. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure, as long as you're not still planning to stab yourself with glass. That startled a laugh out of her small reel. She moved into the kitchen, filling the kettle. The place was too large for one person. Gleaming granite designer lighting, but cold like a hotel room meant to impress guests who never came. I'm Daniel, he said, just to fill the air. She turned. Vivian. Vivian. It suited her, elegant, guarded, and exhausted. I'm sorry, she added softly. For earlier, I thought you were someone else. My assistant. Or my ex. I don't even know. No need to explain. But she did anyway. It was our wedding anniversary today. Daniel glanced at the wine bottle. Empty. Uncorked hours ago. He's remarried now, she added, matter of fact. You'd think I'd stop caring. Some dates stay inside us, he said gently. Even when the people don't. Vivian met his eyes, and something between them shifted, subtle but undeniable. The kettle whistled. They sat by the window sipping tea rain tracing silver threads down the glass. They didn't talk about love or loss, or why two strangers were sitting in the quiet of a luxury apartment at midnight. They didn't have to. When Daniel finally stood to leave, Vivian didn't stop him. But as he reached the door, she said softly, Thank you, Daniel, for treating me like a person. Not a headline, not a charity case, just a person. He smiled, nodding once. And as the door closed behind him, Vivian leaned against it with her eyes shut while Daniel walked back into the rain, unsure what had just happened, only that something in him had shifted too. Something small. Something real. The next morning brought a different kind of silence. Vivian sat at her kitchen counter, the untouched chamomile tea still cooling beside her, staring at the sleek screen of her phone. There were no new messages. Not from Martin, not from her assistant, not from anyone who actually mattered. But her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel, the man with kind eyes and calloused hands who had knelt beside her to clean up broken glass like it wasn't beneath him. Like she wasn't broken, too. She opened her food delivery app, scrolled through past orders, and found the receipt. There it was, order number 8763, delivered by Daniel Brooks. The apartment number on the app, 1603. He really did knock on the wrong door. Vivian didn't know what compelled her, but her fingers hovered over the contact link. Just a simple thank you would be enough. Or maybe not. Maybe nothing would be enough to repay someone who stepped into a stranger's darkness and lit even the smallest candle. She closed the screen and pushed the phone away. Some names didn't need to be called twice. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and stepped back from the engine bay of a worn-out Chevy. It was still early, but the shop was already buzzing wrenches, clinking phones, ringing someone in the corner, arguing about a part delivery gone wrong. He liked the noise. It covered the thoughts. But Vivian's voice lingered like a soft echo just beneath the clatter. Thank you. For treating me like a person. He hadn't expected that night to matter. But it had. Somehow. You're zoning out again, said Nate, the owner of the garage and Daniel's friend since high school. Nate tossed him a bottle of water. Late night, Daniel smirked. Delivery ran long. Yeah. She tipped well. Daniel shook his head. She didn't tip at all. Just made me tea. Nate raised an eyebrow. That's new. Pretty, Daniel gave a non-committal shrug and took a swig of water. You're a terrible liar, Brooks. That afternoon, Daniel had just picked up Maya from school when his phone buzzed. Same building, new order, different apartment this time, 1603. He frowned. What were the chances Maya was holding her art project, a crooked but colorful papier-mâché turtle, and was bouncing beside him? Can I come with you? I want to see the tall building again. Daniel hesitated. He normally didn't take her on late deliveries, but this wasn't late. And after last night, something about returning felt unfinished. 15 minutes later, he stood outside apartment 1603 Maya at his side, holding the grocery bag. He rang the doorbell. A tall, older woman answered. Polished, professional, her expression cool. "I believe this is your order," Daniel said gently, nudging Maya forward. The woman took the bag with a small nod. "You're not the usual guy." "No, ma'am." Daniel smiled. "I was last night, too, just for the wrong apartment." The woman gave a tight, uninterested smile. "Well, thank you." The door clicked shut a moment later. Maya looked up at her dad. "That was kinda rude." Daniel chuckled. "Not everyone's having a good day, Peanut." As they turned toward the elevator, another door opened. 1906. Vivian. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of them, especially Maya. Daniel offered a sheepish wave. "I figured I'd get the floor right this time." Vivian stepped out into the hall barefoot again, but this time in jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her face looked rested, if still wary. "I thought I heard your voice," she said. "This is Maya Danielle, introduced as the little girl beamed. My daughter, my boss, my alarm clock, and occasionally my moral compass." Vivian smiled. "Hi, Maya. I'm Vivian." "You're pretty," Maya said without hesitation. "Are you sick?" Daniel groaned internally. Vivian laughed, a real surprised laugh. "No, sweetie. Just had a tough week." Maya tilted her head. "My dad says when I have a tough day I should drink cocoa and talk to people I trust." Daniel flushed. "She also tells strangers exactly what I said at home, apparently." Vivian looked at him with something softer now. Not amusement, not gratitude, recognition. "I was just about to make tea," she said, voice gentler than the night before. "Would you like to come in? Both of you." Daniel hesitated, but Maya looked up at him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can we, Dad? She seems lonely." Vivian looked down at the girl with a flicker of emotion that nearly cracked her composure, then stepped aside. Inside, Maya took to the apartment like a curious kitten exploring, asking questions, marveling at the way the lights dimmed automatically and the couch didn't have any stains. Vivian made tea, and the three of them sat by the window again. This time, it wasn't raining. The city was gold and silver, the sun low, the streets glowing. Vivian asked Maya about school. Maya told her about art class, her turtle, and how she missed her mom sometimes, but it was okay because her dad made the best pancakes on sad mornings. Vivian's gaze flickered to Daniel again. This was not the man tabloids would care about. He wasn't powerful or rich or scandalous, but he was solid, present, and true, and somewhere in the noise of her world that had become the rarest thing of all. When it was time to leave, Maya hugged Vivian's waist like she'd known her longer than 20 minutes. "I hope your heart feels better," she whispered. Vivian stood there long after the door closed, her arms crossed over her chest, the warmth of that tiny embrace lingering like perfume. In the elevator, Maya leaned into her father's side. "Dad," she said, "I think you should marry her." Daniel laughed, but there was a crack in it like something inside him had shifted, just a little more than he was ready to admit. "Let's get through dinner first, okay?" But his heart was still in that hallway, still at the door, still open. Vivian stood at the kitchen sink staring at the small pool of water forming beneath the cabinet. The faucet had been dripping for days, but now it was worse, trickling into the joints, threatening to damage the cabinetry. She sighed, kneeling to open the undersink panel, only to be greeted by a damp, warped shelf and a distinct moldy smell. She had a building manager, of course, a maintenance hotline, a staff ready to fix problems with one call. But for some reason, the first person who came to mind wasn't any of them. It was Daniel. She reached for her phone before she could talk herself out of it. Daniel had just returned from school drop-off and was halfway through tightening the brake line on a client's truck when his phone buzzed. He read the message twice. "This is Vivian. My sink is leaking." I wasn't sure who else to call. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a ghost of a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. There were at least 5 licensed plumbers in his contact list. She could have called any of them. But she called him. "I'll be there in 30. Vivian greeted him in leggings and a simple t-shirt, her hair in a loose ponytail, no silk, no makeup, just the version of her most people never got to see. Daniel noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he crouched immediately beside the sink, flashlight in hand. "Seems like the valve seal's worn out," he said, poking around. "I can fix it, but I'll need to grab a part from my garage." "Do you have time?" she asked. He nodded. "For you?" "Sure." She wasn't sure why that made her chest tighten. So instead of replying, she asked, would Maya like to come too? "If she's not at school, she's at school until 3, Daniel said, "but she'd be thrilled to see you again." "I'd like that," Vivian said softly. "She has a kind heart. She gets it from her mom," he said almost too quickly. Vivian didn't press, but something in his voice made her pause. "You don't talk about her much," she said gently. Daniel looked up from beneath the sink. "Not because I don't want to. Just, people don't usually ask." Vivian sat on a nearby stool, folding her arms. "I'm not most people." He gave a quiet laugh. "No, you're not," he told her then briefly, honestly. About Claire, his late wife. How she'd been diagnosed with ovarian cancer when Maya was just 2. How they'd fought it together until the end. How he'd dropped out of college to care for both of them. How Maya became his reason for waking up every morning. Vivian listened, her eyes never leaving his face. "She would have been proud of you," she said when he finished. Daniel blinked, taken aback. "Why do you say that? Because you're raising a bright, empathetic little girl on your own, working 3 jobs and still showing up to fix a sink for a woman you barely know. That takes more strength than most people ever learn." He looked away. "Some days I don't feel strong. I just feel tired." Vivian reached for a glass of water, then stopped. She changed her mind and instead walked over and crouched beside him. "We're all tired," she whispered. "But people like you remind people like me why we keep going." Daniel returned an hour later with the part and tools, and within 15 minutes the leak was fixed. Vivian brought him lemonade and a small bowl of strawberries while he packed up. For a moment, they didn't say anything, just enjoyed the quiet, the ease. "I haven't let someone into my space like this in a long time," she admitted. "Usually, I don't want to owe anyone anything." Daniel looked up. "You don't owe me a thing." Vivian smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's why it means something." Later that afternoon, when Maya arrived after school, she bolted through the door with the enthusiasm of someone visiting her favorite playground. "Hi, Miss Vivian. Dad says your sink tried to explode." Vivian laughed. "It put up a good fight, but your dad won." Maya looked at her dad with mock pride. "See, told you you're a superhero." As Vivian prepared tea and Maya colored at the counter, Daniel wandered the edge of the living room, noting the expensive but impersonal decor, evidence of wealth, success, and emptiness. A beautiful space, but a lonely one. "Ever think of redecorating?" he asked. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "What you think this place screams emotional detachment, only slightly." She smirked. "I used to love color. But when Martin left, I got rid of everything he liked." "Then maybe it's time to put something new up," Daniel said, nodding toward Maya's colorful drawing on the table. Vivian looked at the scribbled sketch, a version of her Daniel and Maya holding hands under a tree. The proportions were ridiculous, and the hearts floated above all 3 of them. She surprised herself by tearing a piece of tape from a drawer and pinning it to the fridge. "There," she said. "First new piece." Daniel smiled. Maya cheered. As they packed up to leave, Vivian stood by the door, fingers trailing the handle. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "Just doing what any plumber, single dad, part-time superhero would do." Vivian hesitated, then stepped forward and kissed his cheek. It was quick, barely more than a brush. But Daniel froze for half a second, not because he was shocked, but because he wanted irrationally for her not to step back. Vivian cleared her throat. "For the sink," she said, covering the moment with a teasing smile. He returned it, grateful, uncertain, something blooming quietly behind his eyes. "Any time," he said, voice low. As the door clicked shut behind them, Vivian exhaled, then looked at the drawing on the fridge. The hearts were still floating, and for the first time in years she didn't feel alone. Vivian had always been decisive. She built her company from scratch, negotiated with boardrooms full of men who didn't think she belonged, and walked out of a marriage that was slowly poisoning her sense of self. She had made 100 hard choices and stood by each one. But today she was paralyzed by a simple email draft. Subject line: Re Daniel Brooks. Nomination for Skills Restoration Scholarship. It sat open on her laptop. The body of the email was done, polished, persuasive. Attached were scanned documents she'd gathered herself, his old college transcripts, the GED certificate he quietly earned while working nights, the note from Maya's teacher praising his involvement in her education. Everything needed to nominate him for the city's Community Rehabilitation Scholarship Program, a rare opportunity for adult learners who had abandoned their education due to hardship. All it needed was one click send. But her finger hovered, and never landed. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. From her seat, she could see the kitchen. The new magnet Maya had given her, a turtle with glittered eyes, was now stuck to the fridge beside the child's drawing of the three of them. Vivian stared at it as if it held an answer. Daniel, meanwhile, had returned to the rhythm of his work, the clatter of wrenches, the greasy smell of metal and oil, the comfort of being useful in a world that often felt beyond repair. Still, his thoughts drifted. Vivian had texted that morning, thanking him again for the sink fix. Short, friendly, no invitation. It shouldn't have bothered him, but it did. Not because he expected anything, but because something in her kiss on the cheek had lingered longer than it should have. He glanced at his phone again. Nothing new. He hated how much he noticed. Later that day, Vivian sat across from her mother, Judy Langley, at a quiet cafe in the Upper West Side. It had been a while since they had lunch, mostly because they both dreaded these meetings. Judy wore her signature navy blazer and sipped her black coffee like it was a business transaction. "How's the board handling the supply chain issue?" she asked, cutting into her salad. Vivian stared at her for a moment. "I didn't invite you here to talk about the company." Judy didn't look up. "You never do, but it always circles back." Vivian forced a smile. "I met someone." That made Judy pause, her fork frozen mid-air. "Someone meaningful?" she asked slowly. "I don't know yet," Vivian said honestly, "but he's kind and honest, and he makes me feel like I can exhale for the first time in years." Judy's eyes narrowed. "Does he come from our world?" Vivian almost laughed. "No, he delivers groceries, fixes broken sinks, raises a daughter alone. And that's appealing." Vivian leaned forward. "It's real, Mom." Judy sat back, expression unreadable. "I just want you to be careful. You've been through enough. You don't need to add disappointment to the list." "I'm not afraid of being disappointed," Vivian said softly. "I'm afraid of being untouched by something good just because I'm too used to being guarded." For once, her mother didn't have a sharp reply. Just silence. That night, Vivian sat at the dining table laptop, glowing in the dim light. The email draft was still open, still waiting. She thought of Daniel's hands, steady, capable, calloused from years of work. She thought of the way he looked at Maya like she was his entire world. She thought of how he never once spoke of his own sacrifices unless asked, and never with bitterness. What would happen if she submitted this without telling him? Would he be grateful? Hurt, angry? Was it even her place? Vivian closed the laptop without sending. Note. The next day, Daniel picked Maya up from school and was greeted with a sticky note from the front desk. "Your daughter helped clean up after a classroom project today. She showed leadership and kindness. Thank you for raising a wonderful child, Ms. Landers." Daniel smiled, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into his wallet. It felt like a small win in a week of small wonders and even smaller certainties. On the walk home, Maya said, "Are we going to see Miss Vivian this weekend?" "I don't know," Daniel replied. "Why not?" She might be busy. Maya looked up at him with a kind of knowing that only children possess. She's not too busy for people she likes. Daniel chuckled. You've got an answer for everything, huh? Nope, she said cheerfully. Just for you. That evening, Daniel found himself staring at his bookshelf, the one he built himself after Claire passed, when silence filled the house too tightly. On the middle shelf was a textbook he hadn't opened in years, Structural Engineering and Design. A ghost from a life he once thought was his future. He opened it, flipped through the pages, then closed it again and put it in his backpack. Vivian stood in her living room holding a small package in her hand. She had sent it to be printed that morning, Maya's drawing framed and matted professionally with the words, "Right people, right time," inscribed in silver at the bottom. She set it gently on the entryway table. A knock came at the door. She opened it. Daniel stood there, raindrops clinging to his jacket, Maya beside him, holding a paper bag. "We brought cookies," he said a little sheepishly, and maybe a reason to smile. Vivian stepped aside, heart suddenly louder than it should have been. Inside, Maya bounded to the kitchen already at home. Daniel stayed by the door. Vivian met his eyes. "There's something I almost did," she confessed. "Something that could have changed everything for you. I didn't send it, because I wasn't sure if it was my place." Daniel tilted his head. Send what she looked away for a moment, then back. "A scholarship application. For adults who never finished school. You qualified. I had all the documents." He was silent. "I didn't send it," she said again, "because I realized I didn't want to do it for you. I wanted to do it with you." Daniel's jaw tensed slightly, then softened. "You have no idea," he said, voice low, "how much that means." She stepped forward. "I don't want to help you because you need saving," she whispered. "I want to help because you deserve to be seen." He didn't answer with words. He just pulled her gently into an embrace. Not rushed, not romantic, just solid, real, enough, and maybe just maybe the beginning of everything. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and warm wax. Vivian had never lit candles in her home before, not really. Not the way people did to relax or create ambience. Her candles were always decorative, never touched, still wrapped in designer labels as if they might melt the image she so carefully built. But tonight the candles were Maya's idea. "I made them myself," the little girl said, proudly, holding up 3 stubby, uneven creations. "One smells like cookies, one like oranges, and this one. I tried to make it smell like hugs." Vivian laughed softly, crouching beside her. "What do hugs smell like?" Maya thought hard, like when you haven't seen someone in a long time and you don't want to let go. Vivian blinked, caught off guard. She stared at the lopsided candle, suddenly unsure if she was holding wax or something more fragile. "That one's my favorite," she whispered. Daniel sat at the kitchen island watching them. His hands rested on a mug of tea, but he wasn't drinking. Just taking it in Vivian barefoot in the soft glow, Maya bubbling with excitement, the air thick with something unspoken but comforting. Something like peace. Vivian joined him with a small smile. "She's decided your place needs more color. Apparently she's planning to art attack your living room." Daniel chuckled. "It could use a makeover. She says your curtains are emotionally tired." "That feels accurate." They laughed together, the kind that lingers in the air long after it's faded. Then, more quietly, Vivian said, "I framed her drawing." Daniel glanced toward the hallway where the entry table sat. "I saw it." "I wasn't going to," she admitted. "I thought it might feel childish, or maybe too intimate." "It's perfect," he said. "She put us in the same picture for a reason." Vivian looked down. "Do you think it's too soon for her to think of us like that?" Daniel paused. "No. I think it's just soon enough for us to ask what we think of it." Later that evening, Maya curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn watching an old animated movie she insisted was a classic. Daniel and Vivian sat nearby, their conversation quieter, deeper. Vivian swirled her wine. "You ever think about finishing your degree?" Daniel nodded. More than I admit. It was mechanical engineering. I loved it, building things, fixing problems. But after Claire, everything just froze. My whole future stopped at the edge of her hospital bed. Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then, "And what about now?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Now, it's thawing, bit by bit." Vivian looked at him for a long time. "You deserve to have your future back." "I'm trying," he said softly. "I'm just not sure I know how anymore." She touched his hand, fingers light but steady. "Then let's figure it out. Together." When Maya finally fell asleep, sprawled across the couch in a nest of pillows, Daniel carried her to Vivian's guest room, something that had slowly, without anyone officially deciding, become her room. Vivian watched from the doorway as he pulled a blanket over her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It was the most beautiful thing she'd seen all week, maybe all year. When he stepped out, she handed him a candle, the hug-scented one. "For your place," she said, "so it doesn't feel so emotionally tired." He laughed softly, then sobered. "You're changing me." "No," she replied. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be. I'm just here to remind you." The next morning, the scent of waffles drifted from the kitchen. Daniel had taken over breakfast duty, and Maya was setting the table like a tiny general arranging silverware with great importance. Vivian poured orange juice into crystal glasses, watching them. "I haven't had mornings like this since I was a kid," she said aloud, not meaning to. Daniel looked up. "Good ones," Vivian shrugged. "Rare. My mom was strict. Controlled every minute. Breakfast was just fuel for achievement. You ever wish she'd been different every day? Until I stopped wishing. Then I just matched her. Cold. Untouchable." Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and came to stand beside her. "You're not cold now." She met his gaze. "That's because of you. And her." Maya interrupted with a loud, "Okay, sit. The waffles will get shy if we don't eat them." They all laughed, and for the first time, Vivian didn't feel like she was watching someone else's family scene from a distance. She was part of it. That afternoon, Vivian took a walk by herself, just a few blocks around Central Park. The air was crisp, the trees trembling with early spring. She hadn't walked without a destination in years. As she passed a bench, she noticed a man reading a book, The Power of Now. He looked up, nodded politely. Vivian paused. Years ago, Martin had given her that exact book, said she needed to live in the moment more, then proceeded to schedule their entire life into color-coded Outlook calendars. Back then, she thought presence meant planning. Now she knew it meant attention, being seen, being felt. And that's what Daniel gave her. Not promises, not future fantasies, just a steady hand on broken things and a quiet place to rest her grief. That night, she returned to the apartment and found something on her doorstep. A single sheet of paper and an envelope with Daniel's handwriting on the front. She opened it. It was his scholarship application. Signed, completed, with a note at the bottom. "Because someone believed in me, before I remembered how to believe in myself." Daniel Vivian pressed the letter to her chest, not to hold it, but to keep it close to the place where she could feel it most. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of wax and memory, she let the tears come. Not tears of pain, but release. Because the cracks inside her weren't breaking her anymore. They were making space for light. It began with a ping. Vivian's phone vibrated just after 7:08 a.m., while she was still in bed, wrapped in the lingering warmth of sleep and a memory of Daniel's smile the night before. She reached for it lazily, expecting another early email from her CFO or a reminder about an upcoming board call. Instead, it was a text from her assistant. "Vivian, please call me. Right away. There's a story out this morning. Page 6. I'm so sorry." Her heart jolted. She sat up already, opening her browser. She didn't need to guess which story. She only needed to see the headline, "Heiress of Langley Organics Caught, Cuddling the Help Mystery Man, is a grocery delivery driver and widowed single dad." The article was brutal in its smug, insinuating tone. Photos, clearly taken from a distance, likely by someone in the building, showed her standing at the door with Daniel and Maya. Another showed Daniel's hand resting lightly on Vivian's back as they walked out of the building, Maya skipping ahead. And then the caption that made her stomach twist from gourmet teas to blue-collar romance has Vivian Langley finally traded hedge funds for heartstrings. Vivian stared at the screen, pulse hammering. She didn't care about the gossip. She didn't care about the tone. She cared that Daniel would see this, and Maya, and that they didn't ask for any of it. Daniel was in the middle of frying eggs when his phone buzzed. He wiped his hand on a towel and checked it. First message was from Nate Dude. "You're famous. Page 6. Not in a good way." Next message, Vivian. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't plan any of it. Please let me explain." He clicked the link, read the headline, saw his name, Daniel Brooks, written in cold font beneath an image of his daughter laughing and blurred but unmistakably hers. His hands clenched. He turned off the stove. The eggs hissed and died in the pan. Vivian paced her living room as the sun rose, flooding her penthouse with light she didn't feel she deserved. Every part of her professional brain wanted to spring into action, PR statements, legal counsel, damage control. But none of that mattered right now. There was only one thing that did. She called him. The phone rang twice, then straight to voicemail. Daniel sat in his truck outside the school, Maya in the back seat, humming softly, blissfully unaware. He hadn't told her. He didn't want her to know. Not yet. She was wearing her favorite red jacket, clutching a small paper flower she'd made for Vivian. "Can we go see her today?" she asked sweetly. "I made this just for her." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know, honey," he said gently. "Miss Vivian's probably busy today." "But she always makes time," Maya argued. He didn't reply. Just watched the morning sun ripple through the windshield like a promise it couldn't keep. Back in the penthouse, Vivian stood by the window phone, still in her hand, unread messages stacking behind it like ghosts. The first came from her mother. "This is exactly why I told you to be careful." She didn't reply. The next, from a board member. "We'll need a statement, Vivian. Investors are already talking." Still, she said nothing. Instead, she opened her laptop, typed 2 words, Daniel Brooks, then stared, as if the words themselves were enough to pull him back. That evening, Daniel finally responded. Just one line. "I don't want to be a headline in your story." Vivian reread the message 3 times, then sat down on the couch alone and cried. Not because it was unfair, but because it was true. The next few days passed like shadows for both of them. Vivian gave perfunctory interviews, denied comment, declined to feed the story. Her PR team scrambled to scrub images, threaten lawsuits. But the internet had a memory. And what it remembered was how fast beauty could be twisted into spectacle. She didn't fight it, she just stopped smiling. Daniel avoided the building, avoided the neighborhood. His garage hours became longer. His phone stayed silent. Maya noticed. "You didn't smile today," she said over cereal. "Is it because of Miss Vivian?" Daniel hesitated. "She's not a bad person," he said. "She just lives in a world where people like us get used." "But she didn't use us," Maya replied earnestly. "She framed my drawing. She eats burnt cookies and likes hugs." Daniel nearly laughed. "Nearly." "She made you happy," Maya said softly. And that somehow hurt more than anything else. Vivian finally worked up the nerve to visit the garage. She didn't text first. She knew he wouldn't answer. She just showed up wearing jeans, her hair pulled back, no cameras, no entourage. Nate recognized her from the tabloids and raised a skeptical brow. Daniel stepped out from the repair bay and froze. Vivian held out a small paper flower. "Maya made this for me. I didn't come for drama. Or closure." Daniel said nothing. "I came because I miss you," she said. "And I'm sorry I didn't protect you from something I should have seen coming." He looked down at the flower, then back at her. "She still talks about you every night." "I talk about her too," Vivian whispered. "And me?" he asked, voice low. She met his gaze without flinching. Every morning. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Daniel stepped back. Not far, but enough. "I need time," he said. Vivian nodded. "I'll wait. For you. For whatever part of your world I'm allowed to stand in." She placed the paper flower on his toolbox, then left without another word. That night, Daniel tucked Maya into bed. She clutched her turtle nightlight and whispered, "Did she like my flower?" He nodded. "Will we see her again?" He hesitated, then kissed her forehead. "I think love has a way of finding its way back." He didn't know if he believed it fully, but as he turned out the light and closed the door, he realized something important. Even if the world saw him as a headline, Vivian never had. And maybe that was a beginning worth returning to. The silence was not new to Daniel. He had lived in silence after Claire died, long hollow days where the world moved around him, but he stayed still, anchored by grief and responsibility. He knew how to fill that quiet with tasks, with hard work, with Maya's laughter. He had learned to survive it. But this silence, the one that came after Vivian, this one felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was absence. It had a shape, a texture, a memory. It wore the scent of chamomile and wax. It whispered through the corners of the house like someone had just left the room but hadn't said goodbye. Vivian felt it too. She sat in her office pretending to read reports, nodding at numbers that no longer spoke to her. The board had calmed, the gossip had moved on. The PR crisis averted, but inside she was far from recovered. For the first time in her adult life, she had no desire to fix the narrative. Because she didn't want a new one. She wanted him, and Maya, and that fragile, beautiful, almost they had been building before it all unraveled. She scrolled through her camera roll, found a photo she didn't remember taking Maya in the kitchen, grinning up at her father as he flipped pancakes. Vivian's hand was in the corner of the frame, reaching for a plate. She hadn't realized until now that all three of them were there, all in motion, all belonging. Judy Langley arrived unannounced. Vivian opened the door to her mother's usual cool elegance, a beige trench coat, silk scarf, perfectly pressed slacks. "I read your quote in Forbes," Judy said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Dignified, polished. I was proud. Vivian folded her arms. "That's a first. I'm capable of giving credit where it's due," Judy replied, setting her bag down. "Even if it's rare." Vivian didn't respond. Judy glanced around the apartment. Her gaze paused on the framed drawing still proudly displayed near the entry table. "Still clinging to crayons?" she asked. Vivian's jaw clenched. "Maya drew that." "I assumed." Judy turned back to her. "You know, Vivian, this kind of distraction, it's charming. But it doesn't last. Men like him, they fall apart when the pressure comes." Vivian stared at her mother, pulse rising. Men like him hold people together while everything else falls apart. "You just never noticed." "You're emotional," Judy said, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. Vivian stepped closer, her voice steady but sharp. "No, I'm awake. And for the first time in years, I know what it feels like to be seen, not evaluated." Judy blinked, taken aback. Vivian exhaled slowly. "I don't need your approval, Mom." "I never did. But I won't let you dismiss someone who's more genuine than anyone I've ever known." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Judy nodded once carefully. "If you believe in him that much, perhaps I should reconsider." Vivian didn't smile, but she felt something settle inside her. Daniel sat at the garage, but his heart wasn't in it. He stared at the scholarship application on his dashboard, now fully approved, waiting for submission. The deadline was next week. He couldn't decide whether sending it would mean moving forward or moving on. Maya had been quiet too, less bubbly, more thoughtful. She knew something was wrong. He found her later in the evening sitting cross-legged on the couch, coloring silently. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She looked up. "A bridge." Daniel smiled faintly. "Nice." "Where does it go?" to her, Maya said. "But it's broken in the middle." Daniel's breath caught. "Why is it broken?" She didn't answer, just kept coloring. He sat beside her. "Want help fixing it?" She nodded, and together they began drawing the beams that would make it whole again. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders, watching headlights drift along the quiet street. The city was quieter here, softer, safer. But his heart wasn't still. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a name he hadn't called in days. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't press it. Vivian sat at her piano. It was the first time she'd opened it in months. She used to play when she needed to feel something before life taught her to mute her own longing. She touched the keys softly, then began to play. It was clumsy at first, halting, but the melody took shape like a memory reintroduced to her hands. She didn't realize she was crying until a teardrop struck the ivory. The next morning, Maya placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" She beamed. "I mailed it." He opened it. Inside was a copy of the scholarship application stamped and addressed. "I used Mrs. Thompson's printer at school," Maya said proudly. "I told her it was for something important." Daniel looked at her speechless. "You want to be an engineer, right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Then we build things, even when it's scary." His throat tightened. He reached out and hugged her close. "You are the bravest person I know." Vivian opened her door to a package that afternoon. It was wrapped in brown paper, no return label. Inside she found a single object, a child's drawing. A bridge mended bright, stretching across a river. On one side was a woman in a blue dress. On the other, a man and a little girl. The figures were walking toward each other. The caption in Maya's handwriting read, "We're better when we meet in the middle." Vivian sat down, slowly pressing the drawing to her heart. She didn't need more words. She only needed one step forward. Just like Daniel. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It waits, in the pauses, in the silence. And sometimes silence hurts because it's full of things we're not yet brave enough to say. But when the silence breaks, it becomes music. The letter began simply. Dear Daniel. Vivian stared at the blinking cursor fingers hovering over the keyboard. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic 19 floors below. She'd poured herself a glass of wine, but it sat untouched beside her. She reread the line she'd written, then deleted it. She'd already started and erased this letter 6 times in the past 2 days. None of the drafts sounded right. They were either too formal, too emotional, too safe, or too raw. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to send it. But still, she kept writing. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the backyard, watching Maya pick dandelions. She was humming to herself, completely content in her small world of flowers and sun. She hadn't asked about Vivian today. It was the first day she hadn't, and somehow that hurt more than when she did. Daniel reached into the cabinet above the fridge and pulled down the old envelope, Vivian's scholarship nomination documents, which he still hadn't returned to her. He'd already submitted the real version Maya had mailed. The acceptance confirmation had arrived 2 days ago. The program started in 4 weeks. It should have been a triumph, but it felt hollow without her knowing. He set the envelope down and returned to the sink, washing dishes in silence. That night, Vivian lit a candle. Just one, Maya's hug-scented one. It had burned unevenly over the past few weeks, wax pooled on one side, the flame dancing with quiet stubbornness. She sat at the piano but didn't play. Instead, she reached for her notebook. And this time she didn't write on her laptop. She wrote by hand. Daniel, I miss the way your voice softens when you talk about your daughter. I miss the sound of her laugh filling this apartment like music I didn't know I needed. I miss the quiet, the comfort, the way you never made me feel like I had to perform to be enough. I miss the version of me that existed when you were around because I liked her more than I've ever liked the one I built for the world. She paused, then continued. I was scared. Not of you, but of how much I needed something real, and how much I didn't believe I deserved it. You changed that. Even in silence, you've stayed with me. I'm not asking for everything. just one more beginning. Love, Vivian. She stared at the letter for a long time, folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Then, she left it on the piano. Unsent. At school the next day, Maya sat in art class working on a new project. A message that matters. The instructions were to write something meaningful to someone you care about. Most kids wrote to parents, siblings, pets. Maya drew 3 figures, again. But this time they were standing in a garden. There were words above their heads written in crayon. Sometimes love forgets how to speak, but it remembers how to come home. She folded it and put it in her backpack. That afternoon, Vivian's doorman buzzed. "A young girl just dropped something off for you, Miss Langley." Vivian stepped into the lobby to find an envelope with her name written in looping handwriting. Inside was Maya's drawing, and a note on the back in careful block letters. "My dad still has the turtle picture in his car. He said he doesn't know what to say, but he listens to sad music when I'm not talking. I think you both miss each other. You don't need to say big words. Just come home." Vivian's hands trembled slightly. She whispered, "Oh, Maya, you're wiser than all of us." Daniel found himself standing at the library entrance of the community college that evening, holding his acceptance packet like it might disappear. He had driven there without meaning to. Just wanted to see it, just to make it real. But nothing felt real without her knowing. He sat on a bench nearby, pulled out a notebook from his backpack, and opened it to a fresh page. "Vivian, Maya, misses you. She talks about your candles and your tea and how your kitchen doesn't smell like grease. She says you feel like family. I think she's right. I didn't respond to your messages because I didn't know how to be angry at someone I wanted to hold. But I don't want silence to win between us. I want to build something. With you. If you still want to." He signed it, folded it, then left it in the notebook. Unsent. Vivian stood at her window the next morning, holding a coffee she didn't drink, watching the clouds drift over the skyline. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a friend asking if she was going to the gala next week. She hadn't RSVP'd yet, because the person she wanted most to stand beside her wouldn't be there, unless she asked, unless she reached. She opened her drawer, pulled out the letter she had written, then with a steady hand slid it into an envelope. This time she sealed it. She walked down the street to the post office, the wind tangling her hair, her heels clicking on the pavement. She didn't hesitate. She dropped it in the box. Let it go. Let it find its way. Across the city, Daniel stood in his garage wiping grease off his hands when his phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number. One new delivery scheduled for Vivian Langley. He stared, then opened the app. At the bottom of the screen, a single instruction. "No package. Just you." His heart jolted. He stepped out from the garage and looked up at the sky. The clouds were parting, and something inside him whispered, maybe this is how love finds its way home. Not in grand gestures, but in letters unsent. Finally delivered. Vivian Langley had attended more galas than she could count. They all blurred together, chilled champagne-tight smiles, strategic small talk, and heels that pinched by hour 2. But this one felt different, because this one mattered. The Hearts and Hands Gala was her foundation's first major event since the media firestorm weeks prior. It was meant to be a quiet but meaningful return to charity, to public visibility, to purpose. And more than anything, it was an offering, not to investors. To him. Vivian adjusted her reflection in the mirror. The dress was simple, elegant, but soft. Sapphire blue, modest neckline, long sleeves. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, and around her neck she wore a delicate silver chain. Not for glamour, for courage. She turned toward the small card on her dresser, the one she'd written and rewritten 5 times before finally sending it through the delivery app she knew Daniel still used. "There's no package, just me. I'll be at the Hearts and Hands Gala. You said you didn't want to be a headline in my story, but what if we wrote one together?" It was bold, but Vivian wasn't interested in hiding anymore. Across town, Daniel held the card in his hand like it might disappear if he blinked. Maya peeked up from her homework on the kitchen table, watching him read it again. "Is that from Miss Vivian?" He nodded slowly. "She invited me to the gala." Maya's face lit up. "Are you going?" "I don't know." "You should," she said plainly. "You look better when you're near her." Daniel chuckled. "I don't even own a suit." Maya jumped up, ran to her closet, and came back with her pink piggy bank clutched to her chest. "I have $11.32, she announced solemnly. "You can borrow it. For something nice." Daniel stared at her, heart cracking wide. "Maya," he whispered, pulling her close, "you are the greatest gift of my life." She squeezed him tight. "Then go tell her that." The night of the gala shimmered with soft light and quiet elegance. Held in the conservatory wing of the City Museum, the venue was wrapped in glass and green, the scent of orchids drifting on the air. Vivian greeted donors, shook hands, posed for photos with the new scholarship recipients, each one a single parent re-entering school, rebuilding life. But her eyes kept drifting to the entrance. Waiting. Hoping. Daniel stood outside the building in a charcoal gray suit, borrowed from Nate, altered by a friend of the garage's receptionist. His shoes didn't quite match, but Maya had insisted on polishing them so they shone. He held nothing in his hands, only a decision in his chest. He walked through the doors. The crowd shimmered like a tide of polished faces, but he only saw one. Vivian turned at the same moment he spotted her, and everything else disappeared. She stepped forward, unsure whether to smile or cry. He beat her to it with a small, steady grin that spoke volumes. "You came," she breathed. "You invited me," he replied. Vivian reached out, hesitated, then let her hand fall to her side. Daniel took it, gently held it. "I'm not here for a scene," he said, "or to be saved, or to be thanked. I know. I'm here because I read your letter 5 times. Then I read it with Maya, and we both agreed. If love remembers how to come home, it deserves a door to walk through." Vivian's breath hitched. "Then walk through mine," she said. As the music swelled and the first speaker was introduced, Vivian and Daniel took their seats at a quiet table near the stage. The room faded into velvet shadow, all eyes turned forward. Then Vivian stood. She hadn't planned to speak, but something in her couldn't stay silent. She took the mic, scanning the audience, then settling on Daniel. "There's something I've learned these past months," she began, voice steady but soft. "It's that strength isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about honesty. It's about building again when everything inside you feels too tired to try." She paused. "I want to tell you about a man who knocked on the wrong door one night. A man who didn't offer promises or flattery or wealth, but offered something far more valuable. Time, kindness, presence." She smiled. "That man reminded me who I was beneath the headlines, beneath the pressure. He saw me, not the brand, not the name, just me." A hush fell across the room. Vivian's voice grew more certain. "So tonight this gala isn't about charity. It's about second chances, and the extraordinary beauty of ordinary people doing the bravest thing of all, believing in one another." Applause swelled. Vivian stepped down. Daniel stood as she reached him, and in front of 100 polished guests he kissed her cheek, quiet, reverent, true. After the event, they stood on the museum steps beneath the soft light of spring lanterns. "Do you remember what Maya said the first night she met you?" Daniel asked. Vivian smiled. "She asked if I was sick." Daniel laughed. "No, after that." Vivian's smile softened. She said I seemed lonely. "She was right," he murmured. "And so was I." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "What did you say? That no one should be alone on a night like that?" She looked up at him. "And tonight," he took her hand. "Tonight I'm just glad I finally found the right door." They didn't need a dramatic ending, just one more beginning. Together. The morning after the gala dawned quietly. Daniel stirred awake to the soft ticking of the rain against his apartment window. Maya was still asleep in the next room, curled up in the cocoon of her blankets, her stuffed dog clutched under one arm. For a long moment he lay still, letting the memory of the previous night wash over him like a tide. Vivian's voice at the podium, her eyes scanning the room and landing only on him. The way her hand trembled slightly when she reached for his, and how steady it became when their fingers interlaced. And her words walk through mine. They echoed now not as a question but as an invitation that still hung in the air, waiting. Later that morning, Daniel took Maya to a small cafe 2 blocks from their apartment. They sat across from each other, Maya swinging her legs while she smeared strawberry jam on toast. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. So she said mid-bite, "Are you going to marry Miss Vivian?" Daniel nearly choked on his sip. "That's quite a leap." He coughed. "She likes you," Maya said confidently. "And you like her. That's how it starts." He smiled despite himself. "It's more complicated than that, kiddo." Maya shrugged. "You always say grown-ups make things harder than they have to be." He laughed, then really laughed and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Maybe you're right." She looked at him, suddenly serious. "You're happier when you're with her. I think she's been lonely for a long time, too." Daniel studied his daughter, amazed again at her quiet wisdom. And then, as if sensing his hesitance, Maya leaned forward and whispered, "You can't fix the whole world, Daddy, but maybe, just maybe, you can help fix hers." That afternoon, Daniel found himself outside Vivian's townhouse. He hadn't texted, hadn't called. He just stood there holding a small bouquet of daisies, Vivian's favorite, according to Maya, who had appointed herself emotional consultant for this mission. He raised his hand to knock, but the door opened before he could. Vivian stood there barefoot, her hair in a loose braid, wearing a faded Georgetown sweatshirt and soft jeans. For the first time, she looked completely at ease. "I was just about to make tea," she said. "You like lemon, right?" He held out the flowers instead of answering. She smiled and stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Daniel took in the subtle changes, more photos of her family on the shelves, a framed crayon drawing, clearly done by Maya, on the fridge, the faint echo of laughter in a space that once felt like marble, and silence. They sat on the couch, 2 mugs between them, steam rising slowly. For a while, neither spoke. Until finally Daniel said softly, "Last night felt like the first page of something." Vivian's gaze didn't waver. "I hope it was." He looked down into his tea. "I've never done this before. Not like this. Not when it feels like I'm holding something that matters more than I can explain." Vivian set her cup down. "I've spent so many years trying to be strong. For the company. For the public. For everyone but myself." She hesitated. "And then one night you showed up at my door completely by accident, and somehow you saw past everything." Daniel reached for her hand. "I saw you. That was never an accident." Tears welled up but didn't fall, not yet. They talked for hours about childhood dreams, regrets, the invisible weights they both carried. About Maya's quiet strength. About Vivian's father, whose absence shaped her as much as his presence ever had. About why it's so hard to believe we're worthy of love when life has taught us to expect the door to slam instead. And finally, when the sun had dipped low behind the skyline, Vivian turned to him and asked Daniel, "What does home mean to you?" He looked at her, the question wrapping around something deep in his chest. "It's not a place," he said. "Not anymore. It's a person. It's the moment someone looks at you and doesn't ask you to change or fix anything or prove you belong. They just open the door." Vivian inhaled sharply. "And I want that to be you," he added. She didn't reply with words. She leaned forward and kissed him gently, no grandeur, no urgency. Just a quiet promise wrapped in warmth and belonging. That evening, Vivian cooked. Nothing fancy grilled cheese and tomato soup, but Daniel swore it was the best thing he'd eaten in weeks. Maya arrived later carrying her overnight backpack and ran straight to Vivian, who greeted her with a warm hug and a whispered, "I missed you." Maya looked up at the two of them. "So, Is this like our new Saturday thing now? Vivian laughed. If you'll have me. Maya beamed. That night, after Daniel tucked Maya into the guest room, he walked back downstairs to find Vivian on the couch, a blanket over her legs, flipping through an old photo album. He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. There on the page was a picture of Vivian as a little girl missing front teeth, hugging a dog, freckles across her nose. I used to think I had to become someone else to be loved, she whispered. Smarter, tougher, more polished. But maybe I just needed to become myself again. Daniel gently closed the album. You are more than enough, Vivian. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, no gala, no headlines, no storm, something extraordinary settled between them, a sense of peace, of belonging, of home. Autumn had crept into the city on tiptoes, dressing the trees in amber and gold and dusting the sidewalks with the crunch of change. The morning light filtered softly through the windows of Vivian's townhouse, bathing the space in warmth and the quiet hum of something new, something tender and real. Daniel stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming an old folk tune as he packed Maya's school lunch. He had learned to cut the crusts just the way she liked, and Vivian teased him mercilessly about the dinosaur-shaped sandwiches. But secretly, she loved it. Loved the way he did the small things with care. Vivian, barefoot and still in her robe, padded into the room with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Daniel, their fingers brushing a spark as familiar now as the beat of a second heart in the room. Big day, she said, sipping. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You mean the investor meeting the press interview, or the fact that Maya is officially making us attend Family Culture Day in full costume? She smirked. I meant the third one. Obviously. They laughed, the kind of easy shared laughter that comes not from jokes but from trust, built slowly, delicately across months of showing up, apologizing, forgiving, and staying. At school, Maya tugged Daniel's hand toward the gymnasium where rows of families were already setting up food and displays. Vivian followed behind with a tray of banh mi sandwiches, a nod to Daniel's Vietnamese heritage, a recipe they had perfected together after several attempts and flour-covered disasters in the kitchen. On their table stood a photo of Maya's mother, Daniel's late wife, smiling beside a young Daniel and a tiny newborn wrapped in pink. Vivian saw it and placed a small vase of daisies next to the frame. She's part of this too, she said softly. Daniel looked at her, his heart tugging. She would have liked you, he whispered. Vivian touched his hand. I hope so. That evening, after the school event and the awkward group dancing that Maya insisted upon, the 3 of them walked home together, hands full of leftover food and paper crafts. They paused outside the brownstone. Vivian glanced at Daniel. Do you want to come in? She asked. Daniel looked down at Maya, who was grinning up at him like she knew something he didn't. I do, he said. Later that night, after Maya had fallen asleep in Vivian's guest room, her drawing of a new family taped proudly to the fridge, Daniel sat with Vivian on the balcony. The city hummed below them, but up here there was only stillness. Do you ever think about how all this started? She asked, curled beside him under a blanket. He nodded. A door, a wrong address, a silk robe. She laughed. Don't forget the soup Ken I nearly dropped on your foot, and the fact that I almost left. But you didn't. He looked at her deeply, fully. No, I didn't, because something told me that maybe for once in my life I wasn't in the wrong place. I was exactly where I was meant to be. She blinked back tears. It scares me sometimes how easily I could have missed this. Daniel took her hand gently. You didn't. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Vivian asked Daniel, do you think it's really possible that people can start over even after they've lost so much? He turned toward her, heart open, steady. I don't think we ever really start over, he said. I think we carry our past with us, our losses, our grief, our failures. But sometimes someone comes along who says, you don't have to carry it alone. And suddenly, everything becomes lighter. Vivian leaned into him. You made me lighter. He smiled. You brought me home." Weeks later, a small, quiet ceremony was held in Vivian's garden. It wasn't grand. There were no press photographers, no gowns with long trains or scripted speeches, just close friends, a few neighbors, Maya holding a bouquet too big for her hands, and the sound of wind weaving through the ivy. Daniel stood there in a navy suit, his eyes never leaving Vivian as she walked toward him in a simple cream dress, barefoot on the grass. When they exchanged vows, neither of them promised perfection. Instead, they promised presence, to keep showing up, to hold space for sadness and make room for joy, to walk through each other's doors, no matter how heavy they sometimes seemed, and say, "I'm here." That night, after the guests had left and Maya had fallen asleep curled between pillows and petals, Daniel and Vivian sat beneath the fairy lights still strung across the fence. "Think we got it right this time?" Vivian asked, head resting on his shoulder. "I don't think it was ever about getting it perfect," Daniel replied. "I think it was about getting it real." She smiled, eyes closing. And in that moment, no misunderstandings, no masks, no need to prove anything, they simply existed. Together. Whole. Not because everything was fixed, but because they had finally found the one thing that made all the broken pieces fit, a heart that answered when the wrong door opened. And this time, no one walked away. They stayed, and love stayed with them. Forever. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know where in the world our stories are reaching. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story spoke to your heart the most? And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe. Each story is crafted to bring you hope, healing, and the quiet reminder that kindness still matters. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We're honored to have you here.